But very recently, I sat down and looked at my kid and I said, I am so sorry. That's the first time I ever apologized to it. I said, I am so sorry. I am sorry for trying to force you to be somebody you're not. I'm sorry that I was not there for you to pick out your new name. I'm sorry that I missed all of your first things because I was in my own head. I'm sorry that I made you feel like you were so worthless that you didn't want to be alive. I'm sorry for all of those things. And once I did that, that negative energy inside of me just left. And my kid hugged me and said, Mom, it's okay. And I said, it's not okay, but I appreciate your forgiveness.
Hello, everyone. I'm Connie Gorant. Welcome to Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Thanks for joining us as we speak with experts, authors, parents, and even young adults to explore the transition from parenting our young children to building healthy relationships with our now adults, and of course, when to bite our tongues. We're so happy you're with us, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Before we start, I want to take a quick minute and thank everyone who has taken the time to support the podcast, either by just listening, visiting our website, making a donation, or following us on social media, and of course, giving us a review on Apple or Spotify. A huge shout out to all of you. Okay, so let's get started. Each June, we strive to do an episode honoring Pride Month. Pride Month is dedicated to the celebration and commemoration of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender pride. It began after the Stonewall riots, a series of gay liberation protests in 1969, and has since spread throughout the world. One of my listeners said, "Oh, Denise, don't get so woke on the podcast." I stopped for a minute and thought about it. Does this seem over the top? I guess I feel strongly that so many listeners may be dealing with an adult child or even a grandchild who may be coming out as LGBTQ+. And understanding this rapidly changing community is essential to all of us as friends, family, and just community. So here we go. Today, we're going to have two guests. The first is Linda Reeves, a licensed marriage and family therapist certified as a gender specialist. The second is Jana. She's a single mom to a trans child named Cody. She's been identified as a key influencer on TikTok, love it or hate it, for making a real difference for trans youth. She shares her personal journey on TikTok, but also has become a loving and supportive parent to many young trans people whose parents have shut them out. We're going to start with Linda, and here's a little bit more about her. She's passionate about helping others and helping her clients discover their authentic selves. She operates Linda K. Reeves Therapy using her clinical skills in the treatment of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender non-binary, questioning, and queer-identified individuals. Through her work, Linda has supported hundreds of family members and loved ones who are also moving through their own transition. Her understanding of these unique challenges is the focus of a book she's writing for parents of transgender children. Welcome, Linda. Thanks so much for joining us. Tell us a bit about your journey becoming a therapist and why you're specializing in LGBTQ+, and what it means to you.
Well, I'm a proud mother of a gay son. Little did I know that I would be flying a rainbow pride flag in front of my home, or marching in pride parades, or becoming a therapist for the LGBTQ community. But when I went back and did my master's program, the university that I attended, Antioch University, offered, one of the only universities that offers a specialization in the LGBTQ affirming psychotherapy. So I thought to myself, what an amazing way to get to know more about my son's inner world. So I chose to specialize in the LGBTQ affirming psychotherapy track and was amazed at what I learned about the way that our culture stigmatizes the LGBTQ identity. So I felt even more impassioned to find a way to give back and support those people who are really othered and marginalized in our culture today.
Isn't that wonderful? So that takes me right to the first question I want to ask. You say in your website that despite all these advances, many schools have gender-neutral bathrooms. We have elected officials that are now identified as LGBTQ+. All of this is going on, and people maybe in my listeners or in the general public feel like, well, this is really pretty much mainstream now. Yet you say that it's very misunderstood, and many of these individuals still have very painful experiences. So explain that, and also how can our listeners be more accepting or support this community better?
We're living in unprecedented times at the moment. I think that language I wrote for the website was maybe 5 years ago. And I think that things have only gotten worse, actually, in terms of being misunderstood. You know, our culture is kind of built around this heteronormative, cisgender superior, binary way of thinking. And much of what we are indoctrinated in Western society comes from religious origins. And so anything that disrupts that kind of gender hierarchy is going to be problematic for people who don't fit into those structures. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, you know, intersex, anybody that's, the list goes on. But if you're not, you know, a cisgender man attracted to cisgender women or a cisgender woman attracted to cisgender men, our culture tends to believe that there's something wrong with you. And the American Psychological Association, actually up until 1973, included in the Diagnostic Statistics Manual a diagnosis for homosexuality. But in 1973, it was finally removed. So what I think is fascinating is that we're here 50 years later and we're still stigmatizing people who are gay. Now, gender identity was actually in the DSM as well as gender identity disorder. It wasn't until 2013 that they removed it. And they actually put in a diagnosis called gender dysphoria, which really describes all of the discomfort and dissonance and anxiety and depression and all of the symptoms that occur when someone's experience or felt gender doesn't match the gender that they were assigned at birth. So we have these institutions that have kind of put forward this notion that there's something wrong with these people. And we're just all kind of swimming in this stigma soup. Those beliefs get internalized unknowingly and perpetuated. That is why it is so difficult for LGBTQ people to experience equality and respect that they, you know, are so deserving of.
If I'm honest, people say, you know, I understand, you know, gay and lesbian. And I even have a gay woman friend who says, this is ridiculous. All these pronouns, all this, you know, it's just gotten too hard to understand, too complicated. Can't we just accept people as people? Why is it so complicated, I guess?
The idea of it going too far, right, is kind of an arbitrary measure. What's far enough and what's too far, right? That's supposed to be a very subjective thing. An idea that I would love to put forward to your listeners is the notion that we are in the midst of a gender revolution, right? It's a real upheaval in the last century, which, you know, you can go back and think about George Washington and the founding fathers wearing powdered wigs and ruched cheeks and big puffy white billowy shirts and pointed toe heeled shoes. And they were the most powerful men in the country, dressed like that. So you can think about the way that gender has been expressed, gender roles that have been available. Women couldn't even vote. They couldn't have jobs. They couldn't have certain jobs. You know, just there's been a continuation over time of gender expanding and kind of seeking some kind of equalization with this masculine, male-dominated society that we live in, right? Women have been fighting this fight and still fighting. We wouldn't be having initiatives to bring more women into the boardrooms if there was gender equality. Gender diversity, now you've put that into the mix here, has been part of, you know, culture. Archaeologists and anthropologists have studied it. It's been part of culture around the world forever, gender diversity. And in some cultures, transgender, what we know as transgender individuals, are actually revered to spirit, right? They have more understanding of the world as twin spirit. So the idea that we're now seeing so much diversity is really just a natural evolution over time. The freedoms to express oneself, to step into roles, to be uniquely individual and move away from that binary male-female heterosexual binary that the religious entities really espouse, to being much more free to be free to be me.
Mm-hmm.
Along with that, if we're talking about gender, and it's not just male or female, and it's, the non-binary identities, people don't want to use masculine or feminine pronouns. There has to be some other way to refer to them, which is why we have these other pronouns. So it's really just about being open to understanding that time marches on, things change. We went through that in the 60s with hippies and men growing their hair out and wearing earrings and wearing handbags. And, everybody just kind of got used to it that men can have long hair. But, certainly there's still people that probably have a problem with that. So the way we experience gender, the way we express gender is going to be continually changing. This kind of like tipping point that we're on right now, and why it's so problematic in our culture with like all of the legal and the laws that are trying to be passed, is because it's pushing up against the current power structures. When people are either confused or threatened, they're very uncomfortable. And so they're pushing back and making it a problem when it really isn't a problem. It's their own kind of lack of resilience or feelings of being threatened that are creating a lot of the issues that we're seeing today. That's my opinion.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. And I think in some ways the old saying, you never know a situation till you've walked in their shoes. And so it's easy to sit back and say, I don't understand this. Or many of us have not been in the bodies of someone who realizes they're someone else, or in terms of their identity.
Yeah.
And I guess it takes me to the next question. You really talk about the importance of family therapy when a child does come out, whatever the age is. And I have found this so much in the people that I know whose kids have come out. The parent can be very loving and very accepting because they love their child. Whoever they choose to be, I will love you. But inside, there's this internal struggle because it may go against everything that they were brought up to believe in their church. They may not want to tell their 87-year-old grandmother, that sort of thing. What advice or tips might you share for those parents that could have that externally feeling, yes, I love my son or daughter, but they still have this internal struggle?
I think that remembering that the visions and the dreams and the hopes that we have for our children, we actually give birth to in our minds and our hearts before our children are even born.
Mm-hmm.
We're thinking about the things we're going to do. And a lot of the things that we are envisioning happen to be gendered. Fathers walking daughters down the wedding aisle, the church, sons and mothers, all the kinds of things that we think about that just become completely, have to disintegrate. They just get blown up when the child comes out either as gay or bi or transgender, non-binary. I think the compassion for oneself is the number one, is to recognize that, yeah, this is a big blow. This is a blow to your dreams, your visions, your hopes. But it's not a matter of it being necessarily a negative thing. It's just different, right? The concern I think a lot of families have is that they worry about the safety of their child. Unfortunately, we are living in a very negative culture right now that is creating a lot of headwinds and hardships for LGBTQ people. So parents have to then recognize that some of the feelings that they're having, besides this feeling of loss and worry, might be shame, because of the culture that we live in that has stigmatized, as I mentioned before, that there's something wrong or off about LGBTQ people. With St. Patrick's Day, think about like the green carnations that you see in the grocery stores. But carnations don't grow green. The reason that they're green is because someone put food coloring in the water, and the green food coloring went up the stem and out into the petals and turned the flower green. I use that as a metaphor to describe the culture that we live in that puts forth these notions that there's something bad about LGBTQ identified people. And so these parents have gotten that into their systems unknowingly. In clinical terms, we call it internalized homophobia or internalized transphobia, phobia. The parents have to recognize that got into them. It's not their fault. And that is really at the core of this shameful feeling that they have, that they don't want anybody to know. And once they really can kind of hold that and look at that and recognize that their child is still their amazing child, they're just even more authentic now. And for the parent to then recognize that, yeah, they're going to have their own coming out too. The child's going to come out in their world to the people that they know. And the parent can also now come out as parent of the LGBTQ child. It changes the parent's identity as well. Just, I think, really trying to be compassionate with yourself, understanding that they have an opportunity now to really be a role model in the world of a loving, supportive parent, because so many people need to see that for the betterment and the health of their child.
It's so wonderful the way you said it's still their most wonderful child, but their more authentic child. You know, I just love the way you say that, because I think that's really helpful in terms of, it's almost like you talk about the flower being green. This is almost a bud that's now been able to blossom.
Yes, absolutely.
You were interviewed in the Good Housekeeping story, the article that we saw, how to support your LGBTQ plus kid when they come out. And you've also done a video of this on your website. We have a lot of listeners that might have LGBTQ young adults that have come out, are coming out. They may even have grandchildren that they're learning about now that are coming out. What advice do you give them? What are the different things you say to people when their child comes to them? First of all, be grateful they came to them, I guess, to tell them. But then after that.
No, that is one of them, that to thank the child for trusting you. Some parents get upset that, like, why didn't you tell me sooner? You've known this whole time. Just don't go into the negative. Just, keeping it real positive. Also remembering that love is unconditional. Letting them know that you love them, that you'll always be in their corner. I think it's also important for parents to validate the truth, the child's truth. Oftentimes parents can be like, are you sure? Or, are you sure this isn't a phase? This is going to be really hard for you, honey. You might want to rethink. No, the child has probably spent years thinking about this, wishing it wasn't so, debating it internally. The average age when a child recognizes that their identity is something other than their assigned, in the transgender identity is something other than their assigned sex at birth, is about 7.5. It isn't until 15 or so that they finally kind of like come to grips with the fact that they are going to need to start talking about this with their parents and their families. So they have definitely been wrestling with it for a long, long time. Listen, understand, this is not a time to minimize how they're feeling or freak out about catastrophic future trip about the things that are going to be difficult. It's really about being curious about their own experience.
When you say being curious, what kinds of questions can you ask or not ask?
There's something that I wished I had asked my child at the time that they came out. I did ask them later, but I think it's really a beautiful thing to ask the child what it's been like for them. Like I said, dealing with this. They might tell you that they've been falling asleep at night in tears on their, with their head on their pillow. I think so understanding what it's been like for them, because they've had this whole experience maybe very private and by themselves, and that the parent could be one of the first people that they talk to about what that's been like. Being curious about what the parent might be able to do to support them. When we were talking about transgender or non-binary kids, at whatever age, they might need help with, getting a haircut or a new hairstyle or new clothing. There's the social transition, right, with the presentation. There might be medical interventions that they need support with, legal, changing names, gender markers on driver's licenses and such, reaching out to schools if there's, school-age children, to advocate on the child's behalf, and also asking the child, whether it's a gender or a sexuality situation, how can I help you? Do you want me to tell the family? It shouldn't be the child's responsibility to call up grandparents and uncles and aunts. That it's not like, well, you need to go tell no, the parent can do that, right? With the child's permission, in terms of the timing that the child feels right for the child. It's really about kind of like trying to be in step with the child's process of, like, going back to your idea about the flower blooming. Don't start pulling the petals off before it's ready to open.
What do you do that's interesting you said about informing the rest of the family? Let's say you have a daughter who is, and I'm probably going to say this all wrong, but Sally is now John.
Okay.
And you call grandma, because many times it's the older generation, which I guess I'm part of now, but even older generation. And grandma says, that's ridiculous. She's always going to be Sally to me. I'm not calling her John. I don't know what this is all about. I don't understand it. I'm just calling her Sally.
Oh.
And I know this happens.
It does, yes.
What does anything the parent or the family can do?
Well, it might be excruciatingly painful advice that I'm going to give, but your child needs you to protect them. And, helping to educate grandma, sending her links or books or getting her in touch with someone at maybe a PFLAG meeting. PFLAG is the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit support group for parents of LGBTQ kids. This is an opportunity where ignorance really needs to be met with education, because the impact of a family member negating the child's identity can be devastating. We have got much higher rates of suicide attempts and suicidal ideation in the LGBTQ community. And we do know that parent acceptance is the number one protective factor that helps reduce those numbers. Parents might have to say, here's the information that you need to read. Here's the supports that you can go avail yourself of. And when you're ready to respect, is it John? I forgot, was it Sally and now John?
Yeah.
When you can respect John's identity, then you'll be welcome back at our home for the holiday celebrations. It might be as tough as that. They can't be part of it, because for John to have to sit there while grandma and grandpa misgenders them, uses the wrong name, and doesn't respect them or belittles them or criticizes what they're doing is just so invalidating. It's really hurts to the core for that individual.
And I imagine that happens more often than not.
Yes.
Sadly.
Yes.
So you also say something like that when you come out, it's not just one and done. It's like you're coming out your whole life. How does that affect a young LGBTQ plus? What is that journey for them?
Well, I can think about it in terms of, the clinical work that I do with LGBTQ clients in my office or teletherapy. The work that has to be done is helping the LGBTQ person kind of process and move, unpack their own internalized, whether it's homophobia or transphobia. So the more that they can build resilience and pride and confidence in their identity and integrate that identity, the more resilient they're going to be once they move out into their life.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of coming out, yes, you come out to your close friends, but then you might need to be coming out in certain conversations, whether it's at work or in social settings, when people are making assumptions about about the person's sexuality or gender. And they might have to say, by the way, you keep asking me if I have a girlfriend. Well, no, I'm actually attracted to boys. Or I remember taking my son to the doctor, and he's a handsome young 13, 14-year-old kiddo. And the doctor's like, oh, I bet you're a good looking boy. I bet you got a lot of girlfriends.
Did your son respond at that time? Did your son?
I don't, recall exactly what happened, but certainly it's these assumptions, right? So that's the continual coming out, is when there's these assumptions made about your identity or in the conversation that's around you, or when you're put into a group, if you're transgender individual that's maybe not fully transitioned and it's not really clear what the gender is just from the visual cues, and you're put in this group or that group, and you have to kind of like, sorry, I need to go over there instead. There's a lot of places where those mistakes are made. And so the onus becomes on the individual to correct things.
So let's get now to, a lot of our listeners might have friends' children coming out, or maybe they're the grandparent. How can we, as friends of people who are dealing with maybe their internal struggle or helping our friends feel comfortable about their child coming out, what kinds of things can friends and family do to show support? When a friend comes to you and says, I just found out Johnny's gay. This is so hard for me. I love him so much, but I am struggling with exactly what you said. I'm not going to have a daughter-in-law. Maybe I'll have a son-in-law. I don't know. How do you respond to this? How do we not say the wrong thing?
Well, it's always better to listen than talk.
I guess that's true.
Well, you bring up an interesting concept, which is what we call disenfranchised grief. Unless you've been through something, you're really not able to truly relate to it. It's kind of like when we start losing our parents, right? Unless you've lost a parent, you really won't be able to relate it to a friend who's telling you about the loss of their loved one. I think that's the first thing to know, is that as hard as you might try, you won't really ever be able to relate unless you've gone through a similar experience. So the first thing when people are flooded with emotions and feeling heaviness around some kind of situation like this, they really just want to be heard. wow, it sounds like this is really hard for you. I can see that you're really, torn up. You're really worried about the future. Like really just kind of this, what we call active listening, really parroting back what you're hearing. What we tend to do as adults and capable adults is we want to come in with an answer or a solution, or we want to minimize it. And that's really not what they're asking for. Most people just want to be heard, right? So you want to be doing your best listening, your best empathizing, your best trying to understand, and really asking them, what can I do for you? What would help you right now? How can I be of the best service to you?
That's great. To bring this full circle, the one thing we've never, ever discussed on this podcast is the idea of a spouse and their disclosure of a change of their sexuality or gender identity. And I remember years ago, I read this wonderful book by Jennifer Finney Boland, I think, or Boyland or whatever. It was She's Not There, Life in Two Genders. She was a professor at Colby College, and my husband happened to have gone to Colby. So he was really interested in this book, and we read it. It really talked about their whole journey. And I think they're still married and, how they dealt with their children. Possibly listeners are going through that. How do you deal with that?
I have several clients that are going through that, and it is devastating, mostly because there's this kind of sense of betrayal. They thought they knew this person. And one of the things that I like to use when I'm helping them kind of unravel all of it is, you thought you had A, but you have B, right? So there can be a lot of anger. There can be a lot of betrayal feelings. There can be a lot of mistrust now. And what we try to do really is get to the heart of the love that has existed for those 30 years to try to find a way forward. And that's always going to be very unique depending upon the couple, what they've been through, and the health of their relationship. In this case where I'm working with spouses of partners who are transitioning, that kind of will bump right up against this idea of the partner that I'm working with, their own sexuality. If a female was married to a male and the male is transitioning to female, my client, the spouse, often will ask, well, I'm not a lesbian. How can I still be in this relationship with this person? So it is very complicated, and it can be very, very difficult. But there are couples that make it through. And so it's going to be really dependent a lot, like I say, on the health of the relationship, the things that connect those two people, the stage of their life, and how they want to go through the rest of their life together, if they're going to be capable of that. One piece of advice I would offer for anyone listening who is considering coming out as LGBTQ to a partner, one of the experiences I see in the clients that I'm working with is this tremendous pain of not really being in step or being clued in to what the transitioning partner is planning, and feeling kind of like they're on the sidelines, just kind of like watching this unfold. So my advice is to try to include your partner in your process, that you might be thinking about hormones. You might be thinking about coming out at work. You might be, whatever that is that you're contemplating, whatever that timeline is starting to feel like to you, bring your partner into your process, because whatever you're doing as a transitioning person, you are definitely affecting your partner in a very, very big and in some ways devastating, because it's just really changing the dynamics of your relationship and the dynamics of your life together. So as hard as it is for you to be coming out and doing all of that you're doing, don't underestimate how difficult it is as well for your partner, because they're having their own coming out as the partner of the transitioning person.
And how about your adult children? How engaged should they be in this process?
I think that no one likes surprises. No one likes to be left in the dark, and feeling uncertain and confused is very uncomfortable. So the more that you can keep people on the same page that you're on. And I know that sometimes the transitioning person isn't certain about what's going to happen next or how they feel about this next stage. And just letting your partner and your family know that part, right? So that you can all kind of be in step on the journey together.
And I would guess counseling would be so important in these kinds of situations, to have a third party help you navigate this journey.
Absolutely. Because everyone's having big feelings.
Big feelings.
Yeah.
You've done such a wonderful job at helping us with this. And I really want to thank you. And I think I told you before we started, I usually like to ask my guests to leave our listeners with 2 or 3 takeaways you want them to remember.
Well, I love this question, and I thought about it, and I have 2.
Okay, great.
The first one is that no matter what your age as an adult, your children are still paying attention and watching you as a role model. And obviously, the older you are, your grandchildren are watching you, your nieces and nephews are watching you. And so you have an opportunity to kind of be that person that can be an affirming member of our society and make your statements affirming. Stop criticizing or pointing out the things that are troubling to you, that you don't understand. Usually they're troubling because you don't understand them. So, just remembering the role that you still have, because the way that we are going to really transform our society to becoming more equitable for all kinds of identities is by changing it through the different generations. So, as a senior role model in your family, you have tremendous power to change the dynamics and the thoughts and the beliefs that are going to be passed down in your family.
I love that.
The second thing is that we are living in a different time. So, I mentioned this whole gender revolution, right? This whole, sexuality revolution. You really need to kind of check in with yourself, because you might have learned about gender and sexuality, back when you went through puberty, back in middle school. And those narratives and those beliefs just don't really fit anymore, right? So I would really invite you to seek out some information on, a gender spectrum website or the PFLAG website, or listen to some there's great podcasts on gender out there, so that you can understand that this is just a natural phenomenon, and really kind of maybe unpack or let go of some of the outdated and unsupportive narratives and beliefs that you're still carrying around.
I love that. And if you don't mind, maybe when we finish, share with me some links that you'd like our listeners to go to, and I'll share those in my episode notes.
Wonderful.
Linda, thank you so much. This was great. So much of what you said I know is going to be very meaningful. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Denise.
Now moving to an entirely different kind of interview, we're going to welcome Jana, known on TikTok as Jana Trans Mama. So Jana, we're so excited you've agreed to join us. You are nationally recognized as a key person making a real difference in the lives of trans youth. You're so popular on TikTok and so honest about sharing your son's journey. But equally important, maybe even more important, is that you've accepted so many invitations from viewers to become their TikTok mom. You're said to give so much love to those individuals whose families have tossed them aside due to their LGBTQ plus identities. In fact, I laughed out loud on March 24th. You posted, I'm not even sure I'm going to say it right. Abso-frickin-lutely, I can be your mom. That's totally fine. There's only one condition, that I love you unconditionally. I mean, that just gave me chills. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Jana, why you've taken on this persona of Jana Trans Mama, and what it means to you.
Sure. My name is Jana, and I do have a trans son, like you've said. He came out at the age of 15. Jana Trans Mama came about because after Cody and I started to repair our relationship, because I was not accepting at first. Once we started to repair that relationship, he worked at a pizza place, and I ordered a pizza. And on the inside of the box, he wrote, I love you, Mama. And it was MOMMA.
Oh my.
And then he put his name in it. So I took that cardboard pizza box, cut it out, and it's actually on my fridge. And so that's not really how you spell mama, but that's how Cody spelled it. And that meant a lot to me, because he went from wanting to end his life to loving me in that way. That really made a big difference in my life. And I will always keep that piece of cardboard that he wrote. That's where my TikTok handle came from.
What made you not want to accept him initially? What were your feelings? Because then you can really understand what some listeners might feel.
Absolutely.
If they're hearing this from their own child.
First I want to say, any listeners that might be, having the feelings of it's a phase, you're doing it because your friends are doing it. You're not a boy, you're a girl. What are you doing? All of those feelings are very valid. I want to say that first and foremost. Unfortunately, a lot of parents have been told that your feelings are not true. They're not correct. The feelings are valid, but the actions are not. And that's what we need to differentiate is that's, and that was with me. I had all of those feelings, but my actions were not okay. And so that's kind of the beginning of where it all started with me. I was I was very much a part of my church. I don't really want to say necessarily evangelical. We weren't speaking in tongues. We weren't dancing down the aisles or no judging the people that do. Everybody has their own love for Jesus. It's fine. But that's not what I was doing. But I was definitely in it to where I was so far entrenched into it that I truly believed I was doing the right thing, that I was doing the loving thing by telling my kid he was going to go to hell. Because first of all, when he still presented, on the woman side of things, when he presented that way, I would say he, was a lesbian at the time. I told him he's going to go to hell. I told him I was worried about his salvation. I was told him this isn't true. This can't be right. Your friends are doing all of those things, And I was so involved with the church. I really, really felt adamant, and I felt like I was doing it out of love. I really, really did. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of parents are. They really think they're doing it out of love. They think they're saving their children. But in a minute or two, I might talk about some statistics, and I'll show why you're not saving your child doing those things.
Okay. So before we get into some of those particulars, I did see on your TikTok, you gave someone a one-on-one of what it really means to be transgender. Because I think that, my audience is mostly it is almost all parents of adult children. So we're in our late 50s, 60s, and we're not really bright in terms of understanding this changing community.
Sure.
Because it is changing quickly and new things arise all the time. So the purpose of the podcast, first of all, to celebrate Pride Month. We're going to drop this in June, but also for more people to understand, because I think knowledge is your greatest route to acceptance. So tell us your 101.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to start out by commenting. It's not necessarily that this population has changed. There has always been trans people. There has always been gay people, right. Always been lesbian people. Always. It's just that now they're feeling like they've had enough of being oppressed. They just want to have equal access to life, right. To marriage, to jobs, to bathrooms. That's all it's about. Well, I say that because I want to clarify for some parents that don't understand. Because a lot of parents, including me when my kid came out, said, well, I never heard about this stuff when I was a kid. It was happening.
No,
but they were
right.
just being more quiet about it. Now they're not being quiet. They're actually fighting for their rights now. So just so we can clarify that.
When I meant changing, I feel like, yes, it's always been around, but new language is coming out. There's things we have to learn. So that's what I mean. I don't think anything's changing in their, the way each person is individually, but the language, a lot of things are changing where we've got to get on board.
Yes, I would agree to that. And I will tell you, I am 50 years old and my kid is now 19. He will be 20 soon. He came out trans at 15. So it's been 4.5 years now, and I am still learning. So for parents out there that may have adult kids that come out later in life, whether it be trans, gay, whatever they may be, it is always a learning curve. You will never know everything.
Right.
Here's a perfect example with the Trans 101. So I had one of my TikTok mutual friends contact me and say, I saw your video you posted recently. Can I give you a few tidbits? This is a trans person. I said, absolutely. Number one, you have to be open when a trans person tells you something doesn't sound right or it's offensive to their community. You have to be willing to say, tell me more. And so that's what I did. So Trans 101, in that video that you're speaking of, I talk about the brain not matching the body and how the brain scans and all those things compared to biological females versus people that identify as women, et cetera. So I want to kind of go into just a slight little in depth about that. And these are things that I just learned. We were talking about new vocabulary that comes out and new things are happening. I just learned this just yesterday. So this couldn't have worked in a better time. So if somebody identifies, if they were born male, chromosomes male, okay? If they were born male, the doctors looked at that baby and assigned them the gender of a boy because of their genitals and all those things, right? So if they were born male, they're always going to be male, meaning their genetics inside are always male, but they can identify as a woman. That's how that works. And the opposite. So my son was born female.
Okay.
Born female, but identifies as a man. We don't say male because male and female terms mean the DNA biological makeup of your body. Okay.
And that never changes.
Correct. That stuff never changes. You are male or you are female when you were born because of your DNA. Now, we also have gender which has nothing to do with your DNA. Just because someone has a certain genital doesn't mean they are that specific gender that they are assigned to at birth. For example, my son was born female, but he identifies as a man. He doesn't identify as male because male is a chromosome. He's not male. He's going to be female forever, but he can identify as a male, if that makes any sense. So these are really confusing terms. It took me a lot to process how that whole thing works. But if you were to say to a trans person, oh, you're a trans female, they would say, no, I'm actually biologically a male, but I'm a trans woman. So woman and man are identifiers. I identify as a woman. That's what I feel like. That's what I look like. That's who I am. But I may have male chromosomes, male, other parts of me may be male that there's nothing I can do about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the big thing that I learned. Another interesting fact that I learned was this. A lot of people say, which I did, they say your brain doesn't match your body, and that's, you're in the wrong body. There is no wrong body. The problem is when people are born, they're automatically assigned a specific gender, right? Boy or girl, depending on what their genitalia is. So that's all. Gender is called a social construct. What that means is society decides if we're a boy or a girl because of what our genitalia has. That's basically what that means. But that's not necessarily true, as we know. My son was born female, but they identify as a man.
Don't they usually say AFAB or something, assigned female at birth?
Yes, assigned female at birth, exactly. They used to say FTM, which means female to male, but that's not necessarily, because when you're a female, you're always going to be a female. You could be a female to a man, because a man is the identifier. It's confusing. I get it.
No, that makes sense. It's just hard to remember.
It's hard to remember. And I process this with one of the TikTokers. I strongly suggest some of you look up. His name is Elijah. He's got a few different accounts. I can't think of Elijah's TikTok name, but he's very, very, very well known on TikTok. Just like it sounds, Elijah, a couple numbers after it, but he's not hard to find.
Okay.
We had a huge conversation about this whole thing, and it makes complete sense. The problem is when people say, oh, poor you were born in the wrong body, that sounds like a diagnosis. It sounds like there's something wrong with somebody. There's nothing wrong with a trans person. They just don't identify as people assume that they should.
Now, what's the difference between, and I apologize again in advance, but I'm asking a question maybe one of my listeners would ask, a trans person and a man who dresses up as a woman?
Sure. A trans person, for example, my son was born female, right? Female at birth. In his heart, in his soul, he is a man. So he's not a girl dressing up as a guy. It's different. It's not Halloween, right? Who my kid identifies with every minute of every day, to the fact of my son is on testosterone. Okay. Now, you don't have to do any kind of hormonal treatments. You don't have to have surgeries to be trans. You just are trans or you're not. Okay. However, some trans people like my son decided to have that done. Right. So he has been on testosterone, and people say, oh, that's going to, ruin a female's anatomy on the inside. It doesn't. You and I have testosterone.
Right.
Don't have as much as your biological male would have. So if I identified as a man, but I was born female, I would just take more testosterone. Your body already has it.
But do you remember when we were growing up and we would see a man dressed as a woman? I think they called them transvestites back then, right?
No, they called them cross-dressers. But
cross-dressers. Okay.
Transvestite is a really, really, really ugly, derogatory word for a trans person.
Okay. And that's really good to know, because that's kind of the word that we grew up with hearing.
Right. Like you were saying, language changes, things evolve.
Right.
But we don't want to use that word.
Okay, that's good to know. And there's a lot of things like that.
And just to make it clear for everybody that may be listening, I am not a trans person. So I don't want to speak. I just want to make sure everybody understands. I don't want to speak for their community. Right. I'm very careful on my TikTok page to say, all of my trans friends, I want your comments on this, whatever I'm asking. I don't want to label and say that I am. All I'm giving you today is the experience I've got as far as from a mom's point of view and things that I have learned along the journey.
Well, and that's why we're talking about you, because it's moms and dads that are listening.
Sure.
The other thing I heard recently that I made a big faux pas in, the person who introduced me to you, Levi Tichy, who I interviewed last year, he is just, if you get a chance to listen to his episode,
I do. He's wonderful.
So good. I said to him, he was telling me right when he sort of started his transition, I said, how did you pick the name or whatever? And what was your name before? And he just got silent.
Sure.
He said, that's my dead name. You never asked that. And that just seemed like a normal part of conversation to me. So why is that so
Again, I'm not a trans person, but I will tell you what my kid tells me.
Okay.
So my kid came out and I was, like you say, I was one of those parents, like I've said, I was one of those parents that was not accepting. And that caused my kid 4 mental hospital stays and 1 suicide attempt because I did not use names and pronouns. Names and pronouns matter. We don't have to understand it, but we have to support it. When you have 82% of trans people that have suicide ideation, which means they have the idea of suicide, and of that, I think you wrote the stat down, 40% have actually tried to take their life. All because of names and pronouns is the top reason why, because they are not accepted. So because of that, my kid calls it his dead name because he hated that name. I called him his birth name throughout his coming out. I'm like, your name is Joe Blow or Josie Blow. It wasn't, okay? But that name to him is trauma.
Interesting.
Trauma. That is not who they are. They don't identify as a woman. My son identifies as a man.
Right.
Again, female biology on the inside, he can't change it, but he identifies as a man. So he doesn't want anything to do with a female name. It's a lot of trauma. It's a lot of remembering the times when I was riding in the ambulance on the way to the hospital because I didn't want to be here anymore. Dead names are huge. Another thing we never want to ask a trans person is, so are you going to get any surgery down there? We don't want to ask that question. I know it's very curious for us people who don't know anything about it. But if I walked up to any person on the street and said, hey, how big is your, we wouldn't ask that question.
We wouldn't ask anything about genitalia to anybody.
Because it's nobody's business. Insulting, it's degrading, and it's none of your business. So for parents out there, even for me, for my kid, I have never asked him, hey, Cody, are you going to get bottom surgery? Because you know what? That's not my business. If he wants to tell me and engage in conversation, I will converse with him about that, but I will never ask. And it's interesting how many of my friends have said, so Cody's had top surgery, which means he's had his chest removed, the breast tissue removed. What's next? Is he going to have the other surgery too? And I that's a good teachable moment to say, well, we don't ask that. I don't ask about your female anatomy. I don't ask about your husband's anatomy. So why would you want to ask me that question?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just curiosity, I guess.
Oh, and that's just, it is definitely a curiosity for sure.
Yeah. So we're talking about this transitioning, and you've posted a lot about HRT therapy. You get a lot of questions. What are blockers?
Sure. Hormone blockers. Now, I just always, say this.
I know
500 times. I'm not a doctor, but I went with Cody to his appointments to get his hormone therapy started. And I asked those kind of questions. And we had a doctor from University of Michigan, fantastic doctor. The hormone blockers, what they do is they make the body hold off on puberty. Here's why. And I wish my kid would have been able to do this. People that are born female, okay, female anatomy, when puberty comes, their hips tend to widen, the breasts, they get all the things. On the opposite side, if you're born male inside DNA male, you're going to have the 5 o'clock shadow, maybe. You're going to have the darker voice. You're going to have those more masculine looking features. Some trans women, okay, so we're born male, right? Some trans women don't want the facial hair. Mm-hmm. They don't want that more of a masculine look. So what puberty blockers can do is they can block your body, kind of put your body on a pause so that you don't have those kind of things going on.
You have to do that before puberty, like 11 years old, 10 years old?
Don't quote me. I can't answer. Ask an endocrinologist. I would hate to give the wrong information on that.
Right.
I do know somebody that has a 12-year-old who's currently on blockers, and they are trans male, but they identify as a woman, and they're 12.
If you are on blockers and you're 10 years old or 11 years old, and again, I don't mean to say it's a phase or anything,
sure,
but possibly later you don't want it and you go off the blockers, will you go through normal puberty?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm told by doctors. Again, I'm not trans, I'm not experienced it, but that is what I'm told. And it's interesting because there are so many people on TikTok, the first thing they say is, these little kids are mutilating their bodies and they're doing all these things. No, they're not. Young kids cannot have any kind of even hormone replacement therapy without an endocrinologist involved, without their family doctor involved, without extensive therapy and their parents' involvement. It is not just my kid says they're a boy this week, I guess we'll start testosterone. It is such an in-depth process. And that's the big thing I want people to understand is it's all this misinformation that is going around about kids mutilating their bodies. My son was 16 and a half when he went on hormone replacement therapy, which for him meant testosterone, right? Because he was born female. So he had to combat the estrogen in his body with more testosterone. Does he still have estrogen? Yes, he has more testosterone now. that was a process. I sat down with this endocrinologist. We had we had a year of therapy before we made any decisions. And everything, if you stop taking testosterone, a lot of those symptoms reverse. We can't guarantee that a female, a person born female, will be able to reproduce if they have testosterone.
Oh, right.
My son's doctor said, yes, you can. It might be a little tougher, but you can. There's lots of trans men. They're called unicorn dads who do have babies.
I've seen that.
Because they still have female anatomy, right? They have the female anatomy. They have the uterus. They've got the ovaries. They have all those things. They might do IVF or whatever.
That's miraculous to me.
It's interesting to me. It's again, I'm learning every day. The point to my story is it's not like these little 12-year-old kids are getting their breasts removed. It doesn't work like that. My kid was 17 and a half when he had his chest removed, his top surgery done. And let me clarify really quickly, it's not a mastectomy. If you have had a mastectomy or know of men get breast cancer too, we know this.
Yeah, I know that, right.
We're just going to talk about females, all right, women. When they have breast cancer, they take all of the breast tissue out because they don't want the cancer to spread. So most of the time they're concave in their chest until if they choose to get that, augmentation done. But with a trans person, they don't take all of the breast tissue. They take most of it, but they still want to have some pecs, right?
Right.
So it's not a mastectomy. Close to it, but not quite.
Okay. As you know, my listeners are mostly parents of adult children, and not everyone will have a child that's transitioning or even identifying as LGBTQ, but we're all around people who may have kids, neighbors, and
right.
I guess our greatest goal is not to be judgmental. So I'm asking two questions here. One is, what advice would you give to a parent whose child comes to them and tells them this? Number one, how to respond, that sort of thing. And number two, as an ally, as a friend, what is our role and what can we do? What can you tell us about that?
Parents, the biggest thing we can do as parents, if a kid comes to you at the age of 3, born female, okay, and says, I'm a boy, let him guide you. You are okay. It's not going to hurt a thing if your born female child is in Superman underoos and then they figure, just let them guide you. They either really are identifying as a boy or they're not.
Or they're following what their older brother or sister's doing.
And either way, here's the thing, they might be. But if they're not, and you love them through that process, either way, you're coming out ahead. Let your child guide you with who they are. Don't put specific societal norms on them. Oh, because you have a penis, you have to like football. You're a boy because you have a penis. That's not necessarily true. So let them guide that process, because if you love them through it, they're either going to go, boy, mom, I'm really, really glad you love me through that. I'm really, I thought I was maybe a boy when I was 3, but really I'm not. Or, geez, mom, I am transitioning now and I'm really glad you're with me through the whole process. If you love them, you win either way.
Let's go to the older children, because most of the people listening will have older children.
Sure.
Whether they're there's some people that don't start this till their 20s, right?
Oh, I have TikTok friends. I've got one friend who's been transitioning now, Sarah K. Phoenix. Look up her stuff.
Okay.
Sarah K. with an H. Sarah K. Phoenix. It's K-A-Y. Sarah came out identifying as a woman. See, I still get it wrong.
I know, we all do. We all do.
So a male at birth came out as a woman and identifies as a woman. I think it's been a year and a half, 2 years, and she's in her 40s. So it happens at all ages. I've got a 60-year-old friend who is a trans man. Okay, so born female, identifies as a man in their 60s. I have seen it from young to older. It's really, really quite interesting to see their progress. The biggest thing we can do, regardless of what their age is if they come out to you, take it seriously. Tell me more. What does that mean?
How can I help?
Yeah. Don't ask somebody, when did you become trans? They were always trans, right? When did you realize something was different? When did you finally identify as who you are? Those kind of questions are fine. The biggest thing we can do as parents is just let them be who they are. The biggest struggle I have is people say, I don't agree with it. Well, it's not a matter of you agreeing or disagreeing. If you take another marginalized community, let's just say Indigenous, Black, brown people, okay? You would never say to any of those groups of people, you're not Black. I don't agree that you're brown. I don't agree that you're Indigenous. You wouldn't say that because they are. You can't not agree with it, right? Trans people are the same way. They are. You can say, I don't understand it.
Or help me understand it.
Yes, I don't understand it. I have a kid who's 19, has been out for 5 years. I don't understand it because I identify as a woman and I was born female.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a cis person. I identify with what my female anatomy is. So for me, I'm a cis person. I don't know what that's like to be the opposite, to be trans. I don't know.
Let me ask you this. The person we interviewed earlier said, and I've heard this many times before, that many times when your child comes to you saying they're identifying as a, born male identifying as a woman, you sometimes have to mourn the loss of the child that you gave birth to. What does that feel like and what happens?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. It's really, really quite interesting because that's kind of where my thought was. I took all of Cody's pictures when he presented as a girl off of the walls because I came home one day and some of the pictures were missing and he had taken them down.
Well, that makes sense.
Took the rest of them down and it makes complete sense. I didn't think about it. So I took those down. And it's interesting because that's what a lot of moms, especially dads too. I don't want to, to negate the dad's feelings, but more moms say they're, grieving the loss of their son or their daughter. And I used to think that way too. And then the trans community would get very upset and say, but we're not dead. We are here. So then I say to the trans community, okay, but you have to remember, you have your feelings of how long it took you to come out to tell people, which I respect why, and I'm not saying anything bad about that. Give us time to process. Mm-hmm. Don't give too much time because their mental health is more important than what your mom and dad think, right? So don't give moms and dads too much time, but give them a time to digest it. However, one of my TikTok followers, and I wish I could remember who it was because I say this a lot, and I always credit the anonymous person because I can't think of who they were. They said, Jana, you are not grieving the loss of your daughter. You're grieving the expectation of them. And I thought, wow.
That's exactly right. You're grieving walking them down the aisle. You're grieving the things that you expected to do with your daughter.
Yeah. So I did not create that quote, but it is just brilliant. And that's just it. Because when my kid came out, all my friends on Facebook were posting their senior prom when their daughter's at prom with the cutest boy in school. And she's got the cute dress and they've got the limousine and they're going to get married and have babies and do all these things. I thought that's never going to happen for me. What I wanted for my then daughter is not even realistic. But then I started to realize I've got a kid who's still alive. I can either visit my daughter at the grave right now or visit my son who's doing amazing things and is happy and healthy and thriving. And he has his own car, his own apartment, his own job. He's doing all of the things that 5 years ago, he told me, Mom, I didn't think I'd make it till I was 16. So we have a choice, parents. We can suck it up and go, I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me. Accept that reality and say, but I'm going to love my kid because if I don't, as I told you, the statistics, 45% of people try to end their lives. You make the choice, grave or visiting or visiting the same person that they were before, but a happier version.
Okay, now let's talk about allies and friends, because a lot of the listeners will be, wanting to be allies and friends. What can they do? How can they help someone with this change in their family dynamic?
Yeah. The biggest thing we can do as allies and friends is be there. With all the laws that are going down right now that are against trans rights and against trans people, several states in the U.S. have laws right now that are taking the rights away from trans people. There are laws in different states that are taking the right for people to transition. You've got these kids that are 20 years old and they're taking those rights away. Now they have to detransition, but they're saving the lives of children. It is our job as allies, friends, and family to stand up and go to those town hall meetings at your school board, to go to your Capitol and talk to your representatives and say, no, here's what really happens when you do that to trans people. We can show them all the evidence, all of the data from all kinds of doctors around the world that say that medical transitioning is saving lives, and they will negate it and say, oh, it doesn't happen that way. But if I come up and pour my heart and soul and say, I have a trans kid, I can tell you right now, using names and pronouns saved my kid's life. True story. Because after my kid tried to end his life, the social worker called me from the mental hospital and she said to me very bluntly, Jana, you have two choices. You can either use the right names and pronouns or your kid's going to succeed next time. What are you going to do? You don't have a choice now.
Wow.
It's not about what your God thinks. It doesn't matter what your friends think. It doesn't matter what your parents think. If you want your child to not succeed with trying to take their life, you have to use names and pronouns, period.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great quote. It makes me think of something you sort of mentioned this on your TikTok, but I think I saw someone else say it too, that, all this big argument about the bathrooms, and many sort of singular thinking people say, I don't want girls and boys, that's a woman. And even though they think they're a man, blah, blah, blah. And I read this quote that said, don't worry about the trans person in the bathroom, worry about the uncle at the dining room table.
Exactly. I'm going to post a TikTok this evening. I just scrolled through and found a news release that just went out. I don't even know how many people, these priests and these people in this church, sexually assaulted young kids, girls and boys, but the number was just astronomical. I'm going to post that video this evening. It's just a duet. So I'm going to be next to it. Just letting the video do the talking. The point is this: people are so worried about trans people in the bathroom. And I just cannot emphasize this enough. A trans person, they just want to go in the bathroom and do their duty and wash their hands and leave. The worst fear that I have for my kid is when he and I are together, I stand outside that men's bathroom and I watch who goes in and out, because all they need to do is try to attack my kid, right? It happens all the time. That's where the attack comes from. So anybody that says, oh, there was a trans person, like there was some case in Virginia that I just did a big TikTok about. This lady said, oh, there was some guy in Virginia, just, I don't care about you. You trans people are fine to, stay out of our bathrooms. That person was not a trans person. It was a guy taking advantage of the fact that we now have more accessible bathrooms for trans people. He took that advantage of that, dressed up in a skirt, and went into that bathroom and sexually assaulted his girlfriend, which we should always know that the word no is no. It doesn't matter if you're in a relationship or not.
Right.
Your partner says no, it means no. We should all know that. But there's more to that story. But unfortunately, what happens is people say, it's a guy in a skirt. It's a trans person in the bathroom. Look, it wasn't. It wasn't. And I have Googled and searched to find one trans person that is deliberately, and I'm talking a trans person, okay? So I'm not talking someone dressed in a skirt, a truly identifying trans person went into a bathroom and assaulted somebody in the bathroom. I have not seen one article. But if you look at all the priests and all the uncles and all the bus drivers, not that women aren't doing it too, because women are guilty as well, that's who attacking.
You're right. Well, and really, in all honesty, anyone can walk into a bathroom. You can be a man in a suit and walk into a woman's bathroom. There's no one guarding the door.
The assault, he's not going to care. He's going to walk in.
Yeah. I mean, come on.
So what does that do to the trans community? It makes where they can go to the bathroom become the bigger issue than anything else on their radar for the day. They have to go places where they have family bathrooms. Can you imagine?
No, I cannot.
The restroom, you can't go in because you're afraid that someone's going to attack you when you go into the bathroom. All you want to do is go to the restroom and leave. And there's lots of TikTokers like Elijah who do present more man looking, right? And that's his decision. You don't have to present a certain way to be trans. We know this. However, if you've got someone that is man presenting, okay, we're talking a beard, they've had the chest surgery, they're a man, and they have to walk into the women's bathroom because their anatomy is female or because their genetics are female, that's going to cause more of a problem. Then you've got someone that looks like a man in my bathroom. That's going to freak me out more than a trans person.
None of it's going to freak me out because I feel like they've all seen it before.
I get it. I hear you.
Anyway, I did hear you say that one forgiveness poem on your TikTok. And I think for all parents or friends who have been single-minded and maybe not been as accepting as we should be, I would love you just to read that if you don't mind.
Sure. This is from my book called A Year of Self-Love. It's daily wisdom and inspiration for loving yourself. The author's name is Troy L. Love. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So every day there's just a little inspirational quote, and I read them every day. And I read this one on TikTok. It's from March 5th. And it says, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. This is the ancient Hawaiian practice of forgiveness known as Ho'oponopono. I didn't pronounce it. I apologize to the Hawaiian community. I don't know how to pronounce it. It can open our hearts to more love. Repeat these words and release any negative energy trapped in your body.
Right.
Just say you're sorry and forgive me. The energy. I will tell you, I never really looked at Cody and apologized to his face. We just kind of, I started learning names and pronouns and I started asking questions. I started taking him to the men's section to get his clothes. We did all these things, and I was learning through the process, and we just kind of reconnected as casually. But very recently, the summer of 2021, I sat down and looked at my kid and I said, I am so sorry. That's the first time I ever apologized to it. I said, I am so sorry. I am sorry for trying to force you to be somebody you're not. I'm sorry that I was not there for you to pick out your new name. I'm sorry that I missed all of your first things because I was in my own head. I'm sorry that I made you feel like you were so worthless that you didn't want to be alive. I'm sorry for all of those things. And once I did that, that negative energy inside of me just left. And my kid hugged me and said, Mom, it's okay. And I said, it's not okay, but I appreciate your forgiveness. And I said, I want to use my experience, not because I think, look at me, I'm saving the world, because I'm not. I'm hoping my experience parents can learn from and not do what I did.
And that's what this podcast is all about. So it's great to have you.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
So can you leave our listeners with 2 or 3 pieces of advice that they can take with them?
Yes. I have 3 takeaways today. I've been thinking about these takeaways and I didn't want to forget them. Some of them I've already said, but I'm going to say them again. Names and pronouns save lives. If any adult has a male child, born male, and they identify as a woman, it's hard. It's weird. The person's not weird. The feeling is weird. It's hard to get used to all those things. Not calling them James anymore, but calling them Jill, whatever they choose, whatever. It's hard to do that, but I guarantee you names and pronouns save lives. He, she, right? Or she, hers, he, him, they, them, if they're non-binary. Respect it. And if you say the wrong pronoun, you fix it and you move on. You don't make it this big long thing of, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm trying. I'm getting better. Just she, he, sorry, keep going. Just keep going. Because with the less attention we draw to it, the more affirming it is for the person. And so along with the names and pronouns that save lives, like I've already said, it's the statistics. I just looked these up today. 82% have suicidal ideation. Ideation, the root word there is idea. They have the idea of wanting, they're thinking about how they could probably take their life. 82%. And I can guarantee you most of that is because people are not accepting them. Guarantee that's why. 40% actually try like my kid did because they were not being accepted at home. That's a huge number of people. Huge number of people. And if all we have to do is names and pronouns, even if it feels funny, if it sounds weird, do it. I can guarantee you names and pronouns will make you connect with your child in ways that you never thought you could through this transition. I can guarantee it. I, on my life, will promise that. Third thing is people reject the trans community out of fear of the unknown. That's what I did. I don't understand this, so I'm just going to say no. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. I'm scared about what my church is going to say, what my friends are going to say, what my family's going to say. What am I going to do? Am I going to take my female, born female, identifying as a boy into the guys' clothing section when they still look like a girl to me? How am I going to do that? That's embarrassing. All of those things. That's where the rejection comes from. You hear it all the time. Fear of the unknown. It just is. And if you don't know, ask. Trans people, I would tell you this from my kid has told me this, and my other trans friends have told me, ask. If you don't understand something, ask. And when you ask it, don't ask it like it's being derogatory. Ask it like, I'm just asking to learn because I don't know. I'm sorry if I use the wrong words. Can you help me learn? Trans people love it. Trans people's job should not be to educate. It's exhausting. They just want to live their life, right? But if you ask a trans person a question with sincerity, I can guarantee you they will give you the answer that you're looking for. I can guarantee it. And when you do that, it makes them feel extremely included and validated as a person. When you show interest in who they are as a person, it's very validating. And you might learn something along the way.
Exactly right. And I hope a lot of our listeners learned something just by listening to you today.
I appreciate your invitation. I really do. And it's hard. It's a struggle, moms and dads and friends and family out there. It's a struggle. I've been through it. It's the craziest whirlwind of a time in your life. But I will tell you what, don't do what I did. Just love them and ask. There's lots of, if you look up PFLAG, it's a great organization to support. There's also the Rainbow Youth Project.
Okay.
They are a wonderful organization located in Indianapolis. They do work all over the U.S. and they help trans kids in crisis. So it's more for the younger kids, but it's a really great resource, Rainbow Youth Project. There's also one in South Carolina. It's, oh my goodness, I can't think of the name of it right now.
If you think of it, can you email it to me? Because I'd like to include these links in my episode notes, okay?
Please. If you're, and then, I'm on TikTok. I get private messages every day. My kids out, what do I do? Please message me. I would love to be your sounding board. I would love to be your advice giver, your cheerleader from far away, just telling you my experience. Because I think we can connect with their parents, because when I went through this, I went through it alone. I had nobody. I had no clue what I was doing. I wish I would have had this kind of platform to help me through it, because I know I would have handled it a whole lot different.
It's always good to have someone who understands. Thank you, Jana, so much for joining us. I know you've been so busy, and I will continue to watch you on TikTok when I can. Okay?
Excellent.
All right. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, that's a wrap. I hope everyone learned something from this episode, both from Linda and Jana. I will have links to all of their information on our episode notes and on social media. We have a great episode coming up on weddings, dropping in 2 weeks. Don't miss it. And thanks again to Connie Gorant Fisher, our audio engineer, and to all of you who continue to listen. Please know how much we appreciate your listening and sharing our podcast. And as always, remember, sometimes you may just have to bite your tongue.